Hello, everyone, and welcome to NintenFusion, a Nintendo podcast that fuses past, present, and future Nintendo thought. My name is David, and I'm accompanied with...
Jordan.
And yeah, we're a brand new podcast. If you're catching us, this is episode number 1. Jordan and I have actually done a little podcast before, but we'll talk about that in just a second. We're just getting together to talk about Nintendo stuff again because it's exciting and fun. The basic format, I guess you could say, for this podcast, at least for the foreseeable future, is we'll be doing bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, an episode where we're focusing on all sorts of things that relate to Nintendo, particularly, Nintendo news that happens to be the most important and greatest, topic that we need to talk about that week. Maybe some new games that have recently come out, some reviews for those new games, maybe reviews on older games, Nintendo discussions regarding, anything from the past, present, and future, as well as even Nintendo franchise deep dives or retro talk. We have lots of different ideas for all sorts of different topics for this podcast. And we're excited to get this going and share this with the world because Jordan and I are very passionate about Nintendo. Isn't that right?
Yes, we've been lifelong Nintendo fans.
Yeah. And just to give you like a brief overview of who we are, my name's David, like I said earlier, and my top 3 Nintendo franchises are Zelda, Metroid, and Pokemon. Jordan, what are yours?
My favorite are pretty similar. Zelda, Metroid, and Star Fox. I feel like Zelda and Metroid are consistently at the top, though, for like most average people's favorite
maybe
franchises.
Not so much Metroid if they haven't really played the games, but certainly Zelda. I'd say Mario's up there as well.
Mario,
for
definitely.
Most people.
Pokemon.
Yeah. Nintendo brands are just enormous. So lots and lots and lots of things to talk about.
Definitely getting a lot more attention recently with the Switch.
Yeah, the Switch has been enormously successful. And it's been, 4 years since it came out, and it just continues to get better. I know we have the Animal Crossing Direct, I think, in 2 days from this recording. And I imagine that's going to bring all sorts of attention back to the Animal Crossing space. I think they were teasing some pretty big updates, especially since they're doing like a whole 20-minute video discussion on them.
You say that, but this is Animal Crossing we're talking about. It could just be 20 minutes of talking about the different kinds of coffee you can make.
Very true. Very true. Though some of the data miners have found things that were planned to be in the game, but kind of scrapped because they weren't quite ready ever since like version 1.1 or something, back in April or May, whenever the first update really came out. So it's been in there, but the pandemic has been not so kind to Animal Crossing. But if it's super substantial, that might be our topic for next time.
I think next time there's a certain character being added to Smash Bros. That probably will need some conversation.
Yes, we definitely need to talk about that because he actually is being released, right? Very soon.
Yeah, in 5 days.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of that character, just really quick, he's the reason why I actually finally broke down and bought Expansion Pass 2. Or I hadn't actually bought it. And as much as I love Pyra and Mithra, I just hadn't gotten around to it. And I was like, you know what? We're at the end. I better just click purchase. So I did.
Yeah, I play a lot of Smash Bros. And even if it's a character I'm not really interested in, I want to just have them anyway. Just so, if friends are around to play, then they can have their mains.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I do it as well. Even one of our friends, he's had all of the Smash content for ages. Even back on the Wii U games, bought every single character as they came out, the couple of DLCs that we got. So, yeah. And Jordan and I have played quite a bit of Smash together. So,
I don't think Fighter Pass 2 has really, caught my attention. I don't know. It wasn't my kind of Fighter Pass, but we could talk about kind of the sunset show for Smash Bros. next time, because there is a much bigger event that happened this last week. A huge gaming event, Metroid's release. So.
Oh, yes, and that's kind of our topic for, the rest of the episode, I guess, since we've kind of introduced ourselves. I will say that Metroid is actually really important to Jordan and myself, and I didn't know about this until before recording, but Jordan, you have a little story about us with Metroid?
Yes, so David and I actually met in high school. Specifically, the earliest thing or memory kind of I have of us is that we would have breakfast at high school, in the morning and just talk about Metroid the whole time. Because like the Prime trilogy just came out on the Wii, and we were just losing our minds. Because I think was that your first time that you went through all 3 Prime games?
No, actually, I've played Prime 1 and 2 since the GameCube, though I
Okay.
was like kind of late to the show. Both had been released by the point I actually got to play them. Actually, like an old friend of mine that lived in my neighborhood, I think his name was like Mark or something. He let me borrow Metroid Prime on the GameCube, and I fell in love. That was like my first real experience with Metroid, because I didn't really have any sort of gaming console growing up until about late elementary school or middle school is when I think we finally got like the GameCube or something. But Prime like changed how I viewed video games. But yeah, like I specifically remember when the Prime trilogy like was coming out, I was just checking like Amazon.com or something, and I saw that was on like the front page was the Prime trilogy steel box set, and I was like, Mom, can we order this? Because I was in high school, and back then high schoolers didn't really have credit cards yet, so had to ask my mom to order things online, and I'm so glad I did, because the Prime trilogy is probably one of the best releases on the Wii, period.
It's one of the best deals in gaming history, honestly.
Yeah.
3 of like the top tier video games ever made
Yeah.
for $50 at the time in a pretty nice steel book. Like steel books are reserved for like $80 special editions now that have basically no frills with them.
Right, like the even Metroid Dread, it came with the steelbook, but only if you got the special edition. And
Yeah.
Prime Trilogy was just like, nah, you all get the steelbook. And we were like, what? This is awesome. And it came with an art book too,
Yeah.
just for the $60. Like Retro really spoiled us with that. Plus, they had to like redo the game system's controls and stuff for making it on the Wii, and it just incredible. I will say though, just so that it's clear and out there, I am one of those guys that, as much as I love the first Metroid Prime, and I think that it's the best made of the trilogy, my favorite of the 3 is actually Echoes Prime 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think that's probably the one I hear the least often.
Yeah.
Echoes is fantastic though.
Yeah, a lot of
Really
people say that it's too like spoopy. No, well, not really. Like they don't really dig the vibe. In that game, it has more of the like singular areas that you typically explore all the way through without a ton of backtracking. And people that loved Prime 1 loved how interconnected the whole world was. You got one item and it was just like Super, where you had to go halfway across the map just to find the next place to progress. And Echoes had some of that, but it was mostly like, oh, hey, you're actually mostly going to be in Torvus Bog for this chunk of the game. And I still love that. And I just really love the atmosphere in Echoes. The dark areas were just so fun for me to explore. The Dark World mechanic was just so cool. Plus, the light suit is the best designed suit in the whole series.
I will agree to that. It's either the light suit or the corruption suit for me.
Yeah. The full corruption suit, though, in Prime 3, oh, man, where it's just like the more corrupted she ends up getting, the like darker blue it turns with like the glow. Yeah. Oh, so good.
Anyway.
I mean, that's kind of our history, if we could talk about Prime Trilogy a ton in high school together, we could definitely fill an entire episode about the Prime games, and we likely will if Prime 4 ever gets shown again.
I believe it'll get shown next year.
I agree with that. I have faith.
There's no way they don't have like a playable demo. They have to be at the state where they have a playable demo at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been working on it long enough. I know that they scrapped everything, but still. Anyway, this isn't so much about Metroid Prime. We're here to talk about the 5th entry in the 2D Metroid series, Metroid Dread. And for those of you that aren't super familiar with the Metroid lore, it is the 5th game in the 2D series, the first game being the original Metroid on the NES, or I guess its remake, Zero Mission, on the Game Boy Advance. The second game is then Metroid 2, Samus Returns, or what is it? Return of Samus, I think is what it was originally titled.
Samus Returns. Or no, Return of Samus. I get them confused because one is the Game Boy one and the other is the 3DS one.
Yeah, but I think the 3DS one is Samus Returns.
Yes.
And that was made by the same studio that did Dread. The third game in the series is Super Metroid, which it's funny because it's like this is the fifth game in the series, but none of them are numbered except for the second one. And then the fourth game is Metroid Fusion, which Metroid Fusion was honestly kind of what's the word? Divisive. Like it wasn't as well received when it came out, but is actually now kind of heralded as like a cult classic.
Yeah. One of the big issues with it is how linear it
Right.
is compared to the other Metroids, and people want their Metroids to be more Metroidvania. Um, I would say Metroid 2 on the 3DS, Return Samus Returns. Man, I'm just going to get those two confused this whole time. Kind of had kind of a similar issue, but there's a reason why everyone compares like every Metroidvania to Super Metroid.
Yes.
It is kind of like the golden child of all of Metroidvania. Like
Yeah.
it's so open, and so people just kind of expect that from their Metroid games. And Fusion kind of didn't quite get there. Sakamoto was kind of going for different things. He wanted it to be a little more story focused than Metroid games were. Wanted to bring in some like stealth options, and he was trying to, I guess, I don't know, take the franchise in a different direction. And people wanted just more Super,
Yeah.
especially since it had been so long since
Right.
Super. But Fusion's still a great game.
Yeah, it really is. And it is a big fat shame that Zero Mission and Fusion are only really available on the Game Boy Advance, or I think Fusion for sure is on the Wii U Virtual Console.
I think both are on the Wii U Virtual Console. I think the Wii U is capable of playing every Metroid game
Except Dread.
except for Dread now and Samus Returns.
Yeah, Samus Returns. Yeah.
Because even Prime Hunters is on.
That's
the
right,
Wii U.
because they had the DS like Virtual Console stuff that I never really bought because I never really cared about my Wii U and I only ever used one of our friends. But anyway,
Well, Wii U's are going up in price now because they're the Metroid
Yeah.
box.
I mean, I definitely still have my Wii U in a box in the garage, so I'll have to pull that out pretty soon. The Metroid games, Super Metroid, along with the Castlevania games, are what gave us the name Metroidvania, which, like, if you aren't entirely certain on what Metroidvania is, a basic, like, summary of the term is, like, they're games where they have these sprawling worlds that are basically blocked off by locks that are designed to be opened by abilities rather than just keys that you collect, like in a Zelda dungeon or something like that. And it's just the interconnectivity of the world, the way that you're traversing, you're kind of exploring a maze-like labyrinth of a world, going from area to area, getting new abilities, and getting stronger and stronger as you go. And in a lot of these Metroidvania games, the enemies end up getting slightly stronger as you get stronger as well. But in some of them, like Super Metroid, Samus is becoming a monster and going back to the first areas, like she just pummels through everything, and it's incredible. Like the whole point of Metroid, in the Metroidvania at least, is you get stronger as you progress, and Dread really like hammers into that. Like now we can actually get into like Dread itself, I think, because it is so incredible. We're going to start a little bit by talking about some like spoiler free comments about the game. Like we're not going to really talk about spoiler during this first part, so we will make sure to interrupt our discussion when we get to the more story heavy parts that we think were fantastic. So if you haven't beaten the game and you want to remain unspoiled on that, you can skip that when it comes. But anyway, as for Metroid Dread itself, like I just have to say Samus is back and she's incredible. It's been 19 years since Fusion came out and we had a new 2D Metroid game, and it's amazing.
I'm actually kind of blown away with how good it was. So, I was a bit worried when it was announced that Metroid Dread was finally being made by Mercury Steam, because while I enjoyed Samus Returns, it had a lot of that like linearity I was talking about earlier that Fusion had, and I'm not too keen on the Metroid franchise being very linear. On top of that, Sakamoto seems to have been moving more and more towards this idea of he wanted to bring a bit more stealth to the Metroid
Yes.
franchise. So in Fusion, we got like the SAX stuff, and then Zero Mission came, I believe, after Fusion, and it had that entire second half of the game where it was all just stealth as Zero Suit
Yeah.
Samus. And now like the big selling point was going to be the Emmys, and I thought, oh great, it's going to be a gimmicky game. Emmys aren't going to really work that well
Yeah,
or
they're going to
anything.
be too easy
And
to avoid, or they're not going to be that threatening, and there will be easy ways to kill them, or whatever, after a certain point.
I was dead wrong. Like the Emmys just work in Metroid Dread, and I think a big reason why the stealth worked better in Dread than in say Zero Mission, for example. Zero Mission, it felt exhaustive with how long the sections
Yes.
of stealth were and how just powerless you were. In Dread, you don't really feel powerless. And they have like the Emmy sections, but they're kind of just like wedged into the center of the map, and you're just trying to like crisscross back and forth between it as you're trying to find power ups until you're able to get to the point where you can deal with Emmys. I gotta avoid spoilers
Yeah.
and all that, but
Well, and one of the nice things about like these Emmy areas is when you actually enter into the area, even if you don't have the area map downloaded, it'll show an outline of where the Emmy area ends. Like it's like Samus's suit realizes that this is like a dangerous area, and it'll at least give you like an outline. Like how far do I actually need to go to get out of the range of the Emmy, to avoid them, which like there might be some people out there that think, oh, that's kind of dumb that they just give you that right off the bat, but I think it really helps like sell the area that the Emmy's actually in.
yeah, and having the mini map definitely helps a lot, and just it doesn't feel like you are stripped of resources. It's just you're thrown into a challenging environment with the resources needed to survive.
Even though you do get what is it, physical amnesia? That's what they finally called it. Which actually, I've told this to a friend before, but it actually makes sense from a lore standpoint why it's now called physical amnesia, because it is canonical, though I don't know if this is technically true anymore, because this kind of comes from Other M, but like Samus's power suit is directly connected to her mental image of herself and her mental health. There are points, at least in Other M, where she gets terrified and the power suit actually like disappears and she's back in her Zero suit. There are other instances in like the Prime series where it seems like the suit can get damaged in some ways to make her lose her abilities, but at least like it's clear, at least at this point, that her suit is related to her mental fortitude. And so her being just utterly defeated and not knowing how she was defeated kind of makes sense in some ways for the physical amnesia. I mean, it is kind of weird since it is the 5th series in the game that Samus loses all of her abilities, but again, this is a Metroidvania, and we have to start off with a few abilities so that you can realize how powerful you get and create these natural locks and barriers. But
yeah, I think when you hear physical amnesia or whatever the first time, as soon as the game opens up, it does sound pretty silly, but like you said, from a lore's perspective, it does actually make sense. And I do think Other M is still canon. Other M's kind of in a weird spot now, because that it doesn't have a titled number with it. However, in all the advertising of the game from like the Nintendo store, and Other M keeps getting put along with the other 2D Metroids when talking about the retrospective of the franchise, even though like they aren't showing Prime at all.
It's like 2.5 that has elements of 3D in it, like where you actually go first person. But anyway,
I also think Sakamoto just views it as canon because it's one of his games.
Likely.
Whereas the Prime games are not made by Sakamoto; they're headed by Tanabe.
And I mean, the Prime games take place after Samus Returns, or no, before Samus Returns, because Samus Returns is when she finds
Before
the baby.
Samus Returns, yeah.
Before Zero Mission / Metroid 1. There are some of her earlier missions where Zero Mission is the very first story, at least represented in game, because we do have the comics, though the comics aren't necessarily like fully canon, I don't think. Like,
well, we could talk about the comics a bit later.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about them until the spoiler talk.
Yes, because they actually do tie in. But anyway, but yeah, going back to like the Emmys, the areas. I mean, it's so fun just playing this game. I'm sorry, I just have to say that every possible chance.
Well, and I think it's a large part because it controls so well.
Yeah,
it blows my. This is probably one of the best controlling 2D action games I've played. Not just like Metroidvanias.
Yeah.
It's just everything is fast. The frame rate almost never dips. There are some like large rooms where the frame rate
Right,
will
especially
dip,
where they're large rooms where there are lots of things happening in the background or it's like raining or something.
but those are very, very rare. And so it's just this seamless, fluid combat that you just feel like you're in complete control of the character. And if something messes up, it feels more just like you screwed up than the game screwed up in
Yeah.
almost every sense.
Yes, for sure. There were definitely parts where I got somewhat frustrated with like boss fights, but as for movement and being able to just traverse the world, like it always felt like it was my fault if I like missed a jump or something, because it's like, oh, I didn't actually do that input right. I'll fix that. It never felt like the game was being unfair in its controls.
Yeah. The game is consistently fair, I think.
Yes.
It's challenging. It's very challenging.
It might
Like,
be the hardest Metroid game, honestly.
I think it is the hardest Metroid game. Unless you count. Actually, Metroid 1 might be the hardest Metroid game.
We don't count that
on
one
the NES.
because like, every room looks the same in that game.
That game's kind of a nightmare to traverse. But
That's why they
there's a better
remade
remake. Yeah, there's a much better version of that game out there now. But of the like games that you would recommend people to play, I would say this is definitely the hardest game.
I agree.
Which is interesting because I'd also say this is probably the best starting point
Yeah.
for new players.
I absolutely agree with that too, because the movement and controls are modern. Like
Yeah.
it's been 19 years since they made a 2D Metroid game. We're not counting Other M, because Other M also has really good fluid movement, but it's in that weird like still a 3D environment.
I thought Other M had really bad movement.
Oh really?
Because you were stuck on a Wiimote. You had
True,
an
true,
eight-directional pad.
True.
It was so awkward. If they gave you a real controller, I think Other M would have controlled pretty
Yeah,
well.
if I could use like a classic controller or something, that probably would have been better. But like with an actual joystick. But anyway, like doing the actual 2D games, the latest one was 19 years ago, and that was Fusion and Zero Mission. And those were Game Boy Advance games, which you couldn't really do super crazy movement on them. And Super Metroid, as incredible as the game is and how actually tight the controls were for the time, it's still an SNES game.
I think Super Metroid is personally one of my favorite games of all
I
time.
100% agree with that.
It is practically flawless in every way except for one specific problem, and that is its controls did not age well.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. The world design, the atmosphere, the music, everything about Super Metroid is incredible. But like you said, the controls just haven't aged well at all. And
I think that was partly because they were trying to do too many, like, they had too many ideas or whatever.
Yeah.
It was one of the really big. Super Metroid really would have benefited from a second set of triggers so that you could cycle between weapons or something. Because going off of the select button and then canceling with Y is pretty. It takes a bit of getting used to.
right. And I think Dread kind of strikes the balance with that because, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll hold off a little bit on some of the items themselves that you get, but the way that you actually fire and are able to aim and control in Dread, like, it's so nice. Like some people are like, why can't I use the right stick to actually aim with Samus? And it's like, you're either moving really fast so that you have to use the slight directional changes to aim in up or down while you're running, or you're supposed to stand still and actually fire. And the standing still stuff works for Samus as a character because, when she's aiming for a weak spot, she's not running around the map, I think that was a deliberate choice that they made, where if you wanted that precision, you have to stand still and hold down one of the triggers so that you can fire. But then like missiles and actually firing things all depended on if you were holding down a trigger or not. And then you use the exact same firing button, which worked beautifully. Not having to remember that missiles were a different button than the regular power beam is honestly one of the reasons why I think it controls even better than the Prime games in some ways. Prime, all the missiles were mapped to one button, and then firing was mapped to another. So anyway, I just think that they really did nail how Samus moves and the controls themselves.
And also the animation tied to it is top notch.
Oh my gosh.
Every single thing Samus interacts with has some form of like animation to make it sure she never like looks jittery or anything.
Yeah.
Everything looks absolutely fluid. It's actually kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, you
Just just try to find some like ledges that you're able to like walking down and like go around a corner on, and it's just, man, that must have been a few weeks for some top-notch animators like that alone.
Yeah, I mean, when you slide off a ledge, you run and slide. She has like a unique animation for getting out of the slide and into falling. Like it's not just like she's like sliding and then just stops. There's like she actually kind of like regrounds herself while she's like in midair, and it's incredible. I can't get over how cool the animations are, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics in our spoiler talk because like there are also really, really, really cool animations that happen during boss fights where, like, if you manage to parry a specific attack, it then goes into Samus wailing on the enemy.
Oh, yeah.
And then when they're, like, out of HP and you do that same parry attack, you get to see, like, a whole death animation and cutscene for how she ends up actually killing the boss. And they are so cool. Like, Samus's personality is 100% best represented in this game out of the entire series. Like, everything about Samus herself is just so good and so perfect in this game. I still can't get over how much like personality they could like wring out of Samus with only her eyes and eyebrows when they zoomed in, and her body movements, of course. But like, oh, so good. So good.
It was really, really good. Yeah.
I really want to talk about one cutscene in particular where I was just like, oh my gosh, Samus is the greatest person in the world. Well, universe. But that'll go in the spoiler talk.
I do like the fluidity that those kind of cutscenes interact with the boss.
Yeah.
Where
the way the camera moves, it's not like you stopped the action.
Well, and you can keep firing in them. Like you're basically being rewarded for doing a parry where you just get to just dump your missiles on an enemy.
It's so good.
And on top of that, even in there's some sections where you're not able to shoot or whatever, but you can charge a charge beam. So there's like some strategy that you can also infuse into these cutscenes. So it's not just go into cinematic movie mode and just press Y. It's there are some choices you can make.
Yeah.
In the actual cutscene.
Right, and I think that goes really well into like the combat of the game in particular. Like the boss designs, all of them. I never really had an issue with any of the designs. They were super exciting. They telegraphed their moves really well once you picked up on it. The first time you fight one of the bosses, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, and you usually die every time there's a new phase, or at least I did. But
yeah, I would say they're very hard, but they always feel fair.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's a telegraphed move. Like you could see it coming, and it takes a few good tries most of the time to get down like the timing on how to avoid everything. But you never like feel like you're completely outmatched. It just feels like, oh, I just gotta like pick up and try again.
Right. As part of that like fairness, I don't think really any bosses had more than like 4 moves in a single phase, from what I am thinking.
I think there might be.
Maybe one of the later bosses
boss
has like 5.
Yeah.
But like at least the early ones, when you're getting used to the game and its controls, like you just have to memorize a handful of patterns. Yes, they come at you very quickly, and you have to watch for very subtle like telegraphing motions from the boss. But again, it's once you pick up on it, it gets really fair and then really fun to fight the bosses.
Yeah, and I would say like the telegraphing, there's no ambiguity that they will choose between 2 different moves.
Right.
Or at least I don't feel like that ever happened.
Well,
there's a few Metroidvanias I can think of where they do the telegraphing thing, but they'll tie like 2 or 3 different moves to the same telegraph that can just like, it feels like almost like random generator at that point of what you're fighting against. But
I mean, I did have a problem with one of the mini boss types that does return a couple of times with a particular move that it does. It has one that's very similar, which one of them you can parry and one of them you can't.
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the one that you can't parry is like really difficult to dodge too.
It's super punishing, which again makes it like for a great boss, but I died so many times to those suckers. I was like, I keep forgetting when it's red, it's not parryable.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of them too. That's one of the most used bosses. I wouldn't even like say they're bosses at this point. They're just kind of like major enemies.
Yeah, strong enemies that lock the rooms when you get in with them.
but the map does say boss on them.
Yes.
So like the game itself use them as a
Though
boss.
the boss doesn't, or the map doesn't really differentiate between boss and like mini boss. So I don't know. One thing I want to say about the combat as well is how fun it was to fight the Emmys. Like when you actually get to destroy them. Not too many specifics on that, but like
It's still tense. It's not like you can just like go out and just like destroy them with no effort.
Right.
Like you do kind of have to think.
you have to
How you're
learn
gonna approach
how
them.
they like run around their area. You have to think about like, well, where is a good open spot? Because you learn this at the very beginning of the game. You have to fully charge the weapon that destroys them before you can hit them. And if you're not in a wide enough open area charging, you will either miss or you will be attacked. And it's just so good. Like those sequences were so intense and so fun. They nailed how to fight the Emmys. Because you have that dread sense when you're exploring the area and they're chasing after you and you can't do anything but like run away from them, or if you do get captured, try to get the like near frame perfect parry. But then as soon as you're strong enough, you're still like, oh my gosh, it can still get me and kill me, and I have to figure out where I need to go to get the best chance of killing it. And it was so good. So good.
There are so while I love the game, like Metroid Dread is absolutely phenomenal. I'd say it's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
One of my favorite games of all time, honestly. Like it's going to sit along with Super Metroid and Hollow Knight as like the top echelon of Metroidvanias for a very long time. I'm personally
totally
already on my 5th playthrough of the game. So
You played it 4 more times than me. I still haven't 100%ed it. Like I keep getting sidetracked by other things to play and do, but yeah, no, I totally get you. Totally worth playing multiple times, and I definitely will. It's not a long enough game where playthroughs are tedious. Some games you want to play through over and over again, like I don't know, Zelda Breath of the Wild. If you're doing any sort of like run where you actually want to complete the story, it takes a while. You could just run straight to Ganon after defeating or clearing the Great Plateau, but not a lot of people want to actually do that unless you're a speedrunner or you like challenge runs. But Metroid Dread, like the first playthrough of it without really exploring and trying to get all the items, it might take you 7 or 10 hours. It's not that bad. And then once you know the way to go, it's faster when you play it again.
I will say one thing: if you're going off of the timer on the game, you can't really use that to gauge. So a lot of people are like, they're finishing the game at like 8, 10, 11 hours, whatever, and they're like posting it, and then other people who haven't bought the game are getting controversial, saying, "Oh, well, you shouldn't spend $60 for a 10-hour game." And first of all, yeah, a 10-hour game is perfectly fine to pay $60 for. Second of all, the in-game timer does not count for all of your play time for the game.
When you die or go back to a checkpoint, that's not counted.
Yep. And also when you're in the map, it doesn't count that as either.
Yeah.
Or the load screens. It does a weird thing with the cutscenes where it does count the cutscenes, but if you skip the cutscene, it still tacks on the time that the cutscene would have counted.
That's why a lot of speedruns have short times, but then their timer's longer.
Yep. Speedrunners are getting shorter times than what their in-game clock timer is saying, but everyone who's beaten the game, and you beat the game and it's like 9, 10 hours, you probably actually played maybe 14 or 15 hours.
Yeah.
It's a good chunk when you consider all the time that you spent maybe like dying and having to restart, or spent in the map like trying to like calculate the best way to approach a problem.
Yeah, if you only do one playthrough within like a week of getting the game, you could see how long it actually took you with your Nintendo Online. That'll give you like a better rounded to the nearest hour amount of time that you took playing the game. But if you're like, Jordan or any of the speedrunners, you likely have multiple playthroughs, and then that doesn't really count for your single run of the game. This game is just absolutely incredible. I agree with the 10 out of 10. This is possibly the game of the year for me. I don't know if there's really anything else that stands up to it. I didn't play Monster Hunter. I'm sorry. I know that one's a contender for most people, but I'm just not really a
Monster Hunter is great, but this feels like a gaming event, to be honest.
I mean, 19 years in the making, a game that we knew was in development years and years and years ago, but then went through development hell. it's incredible. Like the fact that it exists. I mean, I've seen some YouTubers that have been huge fans of Metroid and are always like, I need Metroid games, that are literally like, I can't believe I'm holding a new 2D Metroid game in my hands. You know,
I'm still in
I
disbelief.
know, same. I went to Best Buy to pick up my special edition and I was holding it like, no way, I have a new Metroid game in my hands. It was
Can we just
incredible.
appreciate just how crazy it is? Not only did we get a new 2D Metroid, not only was it not a remake, but it was freaking Metroid Dread.
Yeah.
Like the biggest like fan service thing they possibly could have done.
Yes. For those of you that are listening to this and don't know much about like the Metroid fandom, Dread is really important to us because we knew that it was in development for a very long time, but it was also teased in Metroid Prime 3. And which is odd because Dread is the latest game in the timeline, and Prime 3 is technically like the fourth entry on the timeline. But there was one of the things that you do in Metroid Prime to learn about the world and to learn about lore and to interact with your your environments is Samus has a scan visor. And the scan visor lets you look at particular objects. You get to hold down the trigger button, and Samus's suit, AI, scans the item for a couple of seconds and then gives you information about it. This is really useful for fighting bosses or regular enemies. It kind of gives you hints on like, their attack patterns do this, try using this weapon, or try avoiding this, stuff like that. Or it turns on a particular elevator or solves another puzzle, stuff like that. But a lot of them are also lore pieces where they just say random little tidbits about the object and what's going on. And one of them like literally said, Project Dread is in development, and that spawned like so much excitement in the Metroid community, and it took us so long to get to this point.
Yeah, well, and like fans and journalists would constantly go to Sakamoto asking, "Where's Dread? Where's Dread? Is it coming?" And Sakamoto would just keep saying, "It's going to come. It'll come eventually. I'll work on it soon." And like for like 19 years of this,
Yeah.
it was
Over and over again. We're like, when's it coming? And then, you know, when they finally announced Dread, which I still couldn't believe that announcement, I flipped out when I saw the words Metroid 5. Like, it was incredible.
It was such a hype moment.
And then they like had the little like interview video or whatever after their E3 presentation with Sakamoto, right? And he was just like, yeah, I wanted to make this game for a very long time. We actually tried it a couple of times. We had known that they had started development and then had to cancel or push it off. But then he was just like, it was finally time to actually do this game, and I was really happy with Mercury Steam and their work on Samus Returns. It was just the perfect opportunity, and the technology is good enough that we could actually make my ideas work. And, you know, you play the game and you go against the Emmys, and they're smart. They are not stupid. Like, they know how to track you down, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I think when he's talking about that, he's mostly talking because like Nintendo was trying to relegate the 2D Metroid space to the handheld area,
Yes.
and like the big 3D games are for consoles. And it wasn't just Metroid; it was like all their franchises.
Yeah,
at the
like
time.
even Mario games were like that for a very long time. You know, like
Yeah. And so I think a big reason why he was saying, "Oh, this technology wasn't there," was because I don't think his ideas for Dread would work on a Game Boy or a DS for that matter.
The screen isn't big enough. You know, they're not powerful enough to handle that. Even the 3DS probably wouldn't have worked nearly as well. You needed that like higher quality, you needed the better processing power, and honestly, you need a freaking big screen TV that you can turn all the lights off and just sit down on your couch and just be absorbed into the world.
Well, and you also need the team for it. So like Sakamoto also said, we also know that Federation Force was originally planned to be a 2D Metroid game for the 3DS, which likely was one of these attempts at Metroid Dread. And they deemed it wasn't really possible to make Samus work well on that small of a screen for what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So they specifically stated technical limitations for whatever I forgot the name of the studio right now. They do Luigi's Mansion.
Yeah, what is their name? I know exactly who you're talking about. It's
the Canadian one. Next Level Games.
Next Level Games is. Yes.
Yeah. And Next Level Games are a phenomenal studio.
Absolutely.
but they just believed that it was just kind of difficult to get the action they wanted out of Metroid onto the 3DS. And then Mercury Steam rolls in and offers to do, and they get the gig to do Samus Returns. And I guess they managed to hit the quality of action so Sakamoto wanted, and he was like, "Oh, now we can do Dread."
Yeah. And it paid off so well. I'm so glad they let them make Samus Returns, because I really enjoyed Samus Returns. I really did.
Yeah.
It was really fun. It wasn't perfect, but it was really fun.
Like I said, I really enjoy the game. I just believe it's like a B tier Metroid game, whereas Metroid Dread is in the S tier.
Yeah. It's up there with Super Metroid for sure. And even the Prime games for me, like they're all so good. Yeah. So anyway, like kind of our final scores before we get into the spoiler talk, like Jordan already said, I think we both give it a 10 out of 10. The game is incredible, and if you haven't played it, you should really give it a shot if you're even like the least bit interested in it. It is so worth it. Any other closing thoughts before we move on to spoilers, Jordan?
Dread's good.
Dread's good. Put that on a t-shirt. Anyway, we're now going to spend the next few minutes, basically until the end of the podcast here, talking about a couple of the spoilers. So if you want to stay away from spoilers, we'd recommend either skipping to the very, very end if you want to hear our like little outro, or just being done here. And if you're done here, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time, I guess. But now we're going to talk about some of the spoilers, some of the big bosses, and some of the story pieces. So the boss that I was talking about, or the mini bosses that gave me problem, were the mechanical Chozo warriors. Those guys kicked my butt until I got the what's it called, the screw attack, because then I could just hit them.
Yeah, the Chozo, the mechanical Chozo robots, or the Robo Chozo warriors.
Yeah.
They're pretty difficult, to be honest. That red spark dash is just, it's so hard. It comes out so fast and hits so hard and is so difficult to dodge because it just like sprays sparks everywhere. So if you don't dodge in the right spot, you just get splattered.
Plus, you're in rooms with lots of platforms every time you fight them, and they chase you so fast.
Yeah. And then they start putting multiple in the same room.
Yes. I was stuck for probably like 30 to 40 minutes the first time they threw two at me. I was like, I can't do this. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, I would say the first Robo Chozo soldier is definitely a big wall.
Yes.
Kraid seems to be a big wall for a lot of people on their first run. And I would also say the final boss is definitely a big wall.
Yeah. But so fun. The bosses are still so fun to beat. And I love Hollow Knight, so I love good boss challenges, you know? Like, in Hollow Knight, I actually got through quite a bit of the Pantheons because I was so dedicated to beating the bosses. And Dread just really scratched that hard boss itch that I just love about more modern Metroidvania games. So, perfect.
I wonder if Hollow Knight had actually inspired Mercury Steam to like up the difficulty of the bosses, because
I had that thought
Samus Returns did not have this problem.
No,
or not problem, but like
the original boss that they added in Samus Returns, the Dreadnought, like that wasn't nearly
Dreadnought
as hard.
Was cool,
he was awesome, but he wasn't nearly as hard as some of the bosses in this game.
There's definitely kind of a Hollow Knight feel to the boss designs as well.
Right.
It feels like if Hollow Knight had a multi-million-dollar budget.
Honestly, yeah.
For a lot of the
I mean, the way that they telegraph their movements, the fact that they never have more than like 5 moves in a particular phase or whatever, like the fact that some of the bosses end up using like full screen attacks, and even when you're fighting the silly like brain creatures that give you the Omega Cannon energy, like there are so many projectiles floating around during those fights that it's like, this feels a lot like Hollow Knight. And I know Hollow Knight's a Metroidvania, but I do agree. I think that they definitely were inspired by Hollow Knight.
Well, and also the bosses hit so hard.
Yeah.
Like, you get hit by a single hit, and it's like a tank and a half.
I know.
And it's like, I've never seen this much damage at once in a single Metroid game.
I know. I was like, I don't think this game is entirely fair with how much damage it's dealing to me. Like, I had that thought multiple times.
Well, you should play hard mode.
One day.
They double the damage output.
So you're telling me that... which other bosses do I have a hard time with? Kraid was definitely a bit of a challenge, though not as big of a challenge as a lot of people thought, because I realized, hey, the power beam, you can actually mash as fast as your
Yeah.
fingers can get on it so that you can fill up
There
his
is no cap
stomach,
on how fast you can mash your power beam.
which is incredible. I mean, well, the only cap is
So,
really when you're in the laggier areas. I've seen speedrunners complaining about that a little bit.
yeah.
But yeah, so Kraid was a little tough, mostly because he hits so freaking hard.
If you get hit by his, like, just this punch or whatever, it's
Yeah.
just so goofy looking. It's just,
So
he just, like,
crazy.
socks you in the face. Like, here's this giant ferocious dragon. Is he going to breathe fire on you? No, he's going to punch you in the face.
The one that's like the big virus boss, the one that has stopped the lava flow.
Yeah. I think that might be my favorite boss.
He was so cool, especially the scene where you're actually like wailing on him when you do a successful parry. The way he runs around the lava core plume, so cool.
Oh, yeah.
So good.
I think my favorite moment of him is he does the, like, sweeping attack to hit most of the screen.
Yeah.
And the sweeping attack the other way. And then he'll, like, sweep from the top. And so you have to, like, and then he'll, like, pop up at the top. So you can't even just, like, sit at the top
Yeah.
of the screen just shine sparking. Or not shine sparking,
Screw attacking.
or space jumping.
Yeah, space
or whatever.
jumping at that point, I think. Yeah.
But oh man.
No, I know.
Did you get the kill with the shine sparking in that fight? When he turns on the fans, you can shine spark into his face.
I didn't do that. I didn't even think
And it deals
to do that.
so much damage.
I know
Oh,
that
man.
that's like the speed tech right now for beating him because it does so much damage and it ends the fight really fast. But I didn't even think of that. The part where the fans turn on like pissed me off like the first few times because I'm like, I can't keep space jumping and dodge every single one of these.
I can't play Flappy Bird.
Well, it took me forever to realize that Samus's normal jump off of the ground could jump over two of them. The one that kept hitting
Yeah.
me was when it was 2 on the bottom, single space, and 3 on the top. Like, I just kept
Yeah.
hitting that. I was like, what's going on? And then I was like, oh, I can jump over 2 of them without having to be in the air. And then I got it. But, oh, he's such a cool boss. So many cool bosses. And I have to say, like, I was not expecting this game to have so many of the parasites, the viruses in the game. Like, I don't know what I was expecting, but as soon as they were all released, the X parasites, that's what they're called, right?
Yeah.
I was suddenly blanked. As soon as the X parasites were released, and then suddenly everything was an X parasite, I was like, I honestly didn't expect them to do that in this game. I thought they were going to literally be contained to a single area the whole time, and then they were like,
Yeah.
nope, they're everywhere.
It definitely increased the kind of intensity
Yeah.
of the latter half of the game, especially since at that point you had, I believe, the screw attack and also the plasma beam.
Yep.
So at that point you're feeling pretty overpowered, and then that was when they bring in the Chozo soldiers and the X parasites. It's like, wow, there's a spike increase of difficulty in the game,
Yeah,
because
damage
you had a
and-
spike increase in damage output
For real.
So it just made sense.
It honestly felt perfect, the point that they introduced it at. But I just wasn't expecting it. I was like, oh, as soon as it was like, oh, it seems like there aren't really any X parasites here, you know, after the video and the story was like, that's strange that there's nothing here. I was like, oh, I guess they're not really going to be a big bad during this game. Like, you know, maybe we thought that it really was just a single one, a tiny little sighting. Nope. Everything is an X parasite once you release them. Everything.
I will say one thing that really surprised me. They showed Kraid a lot in the promotional material.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of a big tell that this game was going to lean a bit heavy on nostalgia.
Yeah.
To sell the game or whatever. So we were going to see the space pirates again. We're going to get all the Super Metroid bosses to be revived just like Kraid was. But no, Kraid's the only nostalgia bit in the entire game.
And it almost seems like, you know, the fact that Kraid was locked up and in one of the like test facility areas, you know, because it was where they had like biological test facilities across the map. If you look at things that are happening, it seems like maybe the Chozo actually created the Kraid species, you know, like
I don't know.
either they managed to capture and clone one for their experiments, or like he was created by the Chozo. Like it's hard to know for sure. Maybe some YouTuber has made a whole theory
there
on this.
is. So you haven't 100% of the game. There is an image that you unlock of the Chozo, I believe, capturing Kraid.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense. I mean, I
Because I'm
should have
pretty
looked
sure
at the
Kraid
image,
is
but
whatever species the space pirates are. So he's along
oh,
with Crocomire and Ridley
that's
and
right. Okay, that makes sense.
whatever's going on in that that species.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting species. My personal theory is the space pirates are the species is what you generally see of the space pirates, and then Ridley, Kraid, and Crocomire are like genetic mutations because the space pirates love their genetic
Right,
mutations.
because
Um,
most of the space pirates, at least what I understood, were like mostly Zebesians, weren't they?
I'm not sure.
Or at least they look a lot like them. Maybe that was just a
Yeah.
technical art limitation or something. But no. Anyway, space pirates as a species, yeah. Though I guess they did reveal in Prime 3 that the space pirates do have their own original homeworld that isn't Zebes, however you
Right.
pronounce
You
it.
go to the space pirate homeworld.
Yeah, so I guess I was wrong. They just look similar. But anyway, like kind of moving on to some of the story, like some of the coolest new lore to the Metroid series was added in this game. Like so many cool things that honestly tied to some of the comics and stuff that you don't really learn in game. Like a lot of people don't really know that Samus is a like genetic experiment. Her parents were killed by Ridley. That is canon. We know that for sure. Other M definitely drove that point hard, and we're going to say that Other M still counts as canon, at least somewhat.
As long as Sakamoto's making games.
Right. And Samus was then taken in by the Chozo and raised by them and was given, like, or at least infused with some of their DNA so that she could use a power suit and have heightened physical abilities. And the end of this game revealed that Ravenbeak was likely like the DNA donor to Samus.
I kind of that was a really shocking moment.
Yes.
I was very surprised.
I was like,
I had to
"Ooh."
pause the game and just kind of collect my thoughts on that because they went full Star Wars
Yep.
there.
They were like, my daughter. I was like, okay. Usually when they pull a Star Wars and they're like, I am your father or whatever, it's like, oh, we saw that coming a mile away, but I didn't expect this. Like, most of the stuff that I had imagined or read about when it came to Samus's past was like, nah, she's she was just raised by some Chozo and those Chozo were killed, or she left them and they went off to do their own thing and disappeared forever. But then it was just like, no, it's Ravenbeak. He was a really bad guy that really wanted a lot of power, and it kind of implies that at least the genetic mutation part of Samus's upbringing with the Chozo was done by the warring tribe, and she doesn't remember it.
Well, it seems to be both tribes coming together because she
Yeah.
also has Toha genes in her. But that might have been because the Makin decided it to be that way because the Makin just wanted. Maybe it's possible that like Toa and Makin are just not capable of sharing both abilities. So that's why they took Samus. They're like, well, we'll just try to jam both abilities in this one vessel
Right.
to both control the Metroids and be a crazy warrior.
Right, because that's what the DNA does. That's what they were saying in the game. The one gives you control over the Metroids. That tribe had specific control over the Metroids, and then the other tribe was the warrior tribe that had heightened physical abilities. So yeah, by putting both of them in Samus, yeah, and like when you actually get to defeating Ravenbeak and Samus is kind of like being held at a choke grab by him after you actually defeat the third phase, where he's just like, I don't actually need to extract the Metroid DNA out of you because I can create the most powerful Metroid of all, Samus Aran. Like, that blew my mind too. I was like, you know what? He's actually right. I had known for quite a while that the word Metroid actually is the Chozo word for powerful warrior. That's why they named them the Metroids, because the Metroids were supposed to go out and like help them conquer worlds or, stuff like that. But now Samus literally is the like title of her series. She is the Metroid now. And
Yeah,
so cool.
I like that, and I also dislike that because now all the memes of people saying, I like Metroid, he's my favorite Smash Bros. Character,
True.
they kind of have it a bit more true now.
I know. Yeah. Which, that part's unfortunate. But for a lore junkie like myself, I loved the choice. It was so cool. And then, of course, she.
And it's fitting for the story too, or in lore.
Yeah, yeah.
And they played a bit heavy into the idea that she's becoming more and more Metroid like because she's weak to ice, and that honestly I
Uh-huh.
thought was my favorite bit of lore being added, because if you didn't know, Metroids are weak to
Yep,
ice. So
and
now
that was
Samus is weak to it.
right, and that actually started in Fusion because the SAX had the Ice Beam, and that was one of the reasons why you had to really avoid the SAX. Was not only did it have Samus's full suit powers, but it had the Ice Beam, which Samus was super
Hmm.
weak to in that game, and she's retained that weakness to cold. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can't go into any of those cold areas without the gravity suit now. Like in the Prime games, there are lots of really cold areas, and you have no problem in there. You do not need any sort of suit to traverse through and survive the cold. But now that she has the Metroid DNA, she definitely does, and they just keep leaning heavier and heavier into that. The craziest thing was near the end of the game, at least for me, what honestly blew my mind the first time, because it isn't until really like the near the end of the game when we start getting these lore and story dumps. It was when she like walked into that room with all of the creatures inside the like stasis pods, and she absorbed the energy from it, but didn't know what was happening. You know, I was like, oh no. And then like in the next room, you fight one of the infected Chozo warriors, so not the robotic ones, but one that's actually an X parasite, and you do the like parry sequence at the end to fight it, and instead of her like opening the mouth and jamming it full of missiles in the power beam, she slams the mouth shut, keeps her hand on the mouth, sucks up all of the energy, and then does the coolest freaking pose she has ever done, where her hand is outstretched and then she clenches her fist closed to finish absorbing the energy. I was blown away. That cutscene, that moment blew my mind.
Well, it's just kind of funny because, like, so, like you're saying, in the first room, she's like, "Oh no, what is this terrifying ability? This is kind of maybe not a good thing." And then she's just like, "Nah, this is great."
Yep, that's
Like
exactly
immediately
what
the
she
next
does.
room.
It was so cool. Just the way that she just like shaboom, like the sound effect that happened when she clenched her fist. Oh, it's just so incredible. I love Samus so much. She's literally one of the coolest characters in all of Nintendo, like period. One other thing that I wanted to bring up was there was a point where she did a little bit of voice acting where she spoke Chozo. That kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting her to really talk at all because she hasn't in any of the games except for Other M, and that one doesn't count.
I think I was caught off guard because of Other M, because I
Yeah.
figured Other M was received so poorly that they would never want to have her speak
Yes,
again.
yes,
But
exactly.
this fit perfectly fine. It wasn't like this 12-hour monologue of
The baby.
some abstract thing. Yeah. Um, this fit, and it's just like, yeah, I'm going to do my mission and just go on.
And the
But
voice actress they got for her like fit really well with her character, the way that she talks. It was just all so good. So good. Anyway, I loved it. I thought that again they just did so well with the design, the characters, the story was really quite engaging after a while. Like I wasn't expecting the Adam AI to be fake like the entire game. Um, I kind of knew something was up when like I saw Samus, but kind of like you were saying before the podcast, Jordan, it seemed like that might have just been like a mistranslation thing. Like they just weren't careful enough about that, right?
yeah, it's a Spanish studio directed by a Japanese director who we know from Other M likes to be really hands-on to his script, which is great. It's fine. But I when there was that, so like we had the Adam AI saying at the beginning of the game, referring to Samus as Lady, like you did in Other M and Fusion, and then that kind of just gets dropped later on. I personally was a bit caught off guard with that. I didn't notice it, but I also thought I didn't think much of it because I just thought, oh, maybe there's just like some translation thing going on.
Right.
But
But the fact that, you know, at the end of the game it's revealed that it was Ravenbeak talking, it makes it pretty obvious that he was guiding Samus through this labyrinth to awaken the Metroid powers and make her stronger. Like,
yeah,
it was his plan the whole time. Which, I mean, it was honestly like really interesting. One of the other points that kind of caught me off guard and had me a little suspicious, though I didn't like piece it all together, was after the Emmys are disabled, the Adam AI, which was Ravenbeak, was kind of like, huh, I wonder why they were turned off. That was really nice of that other Chozo guy to do that. And then they turned back on, and he didn't know why. You know, like he wasn't watching. He didn't actually enable it himself, and it wasn't clear that it was the X-infected Chozo Sage guy. Like I was like, huh, that's interesting. He said it must be the work of Ravenbeak when it really wasn't.
A lot of the stuff with Quiet Robe kind of, I don't know. I'm still I still don't understand a lot of it.
Especially what happened at the end.
Yeah, he gets infected by the X, and then immediately turns on the Emmy for some reason, and then goes to hide in Samus's ship to only like bow to her and then just like fuse in with her to disable her Metroid powers so that she could fly away. And it just
I don't understand.
I don't know. I feel like Sakamoto had plans for Quiet Robe, and then it just didn't come to fruition, and they didn't want another Other M scenario where they had like this plot hook just sort of hanging, so they just kind of threw him in at the end.
Though we do know from Fusion that it is canonical that the X parasites, when they actually infect a host, do retain the memories of their host. So they have access to those memories. I don't know if that means that, the will was so strong, or that the memory was like, we really need Samus to do great and powerful things, or who knows. But I imagine it has something to do with that, but they definitely did not explain it, and it makes me really hopeful.
Why turn back on the Emmy? I mean, it's possible that when Quiet Robe got revived because his memories were still there, he was like, oh no, the X parasites are loose. That Emmy's purpose are to dispatch of the X parasites. So maybe that's why the X parasite
it was
infected.
Like, getting used to being in the body, and it's something, I don't know. Like, maybe it didn't have full access. It wasn't clear for sure. And
it wasn't explored very well.
I don't think
that is probably the one one missteps of the story of this game.
Yes, and I really do hope that we get some really cool stuff in Metroid 6, because if the fact that they released a Metroid game on the Switch, it's already doing incredibly well review wise, and it seems like it's pulled in a bunch of newcomers to the series. Like, it was like the top selling game last week in the UK and Japan. I'm sure the sales in the US are incredible as well. I think we'll be getting another 2D Metroid game, hopefully from Mercury Stream. So
I really hope so. Like, Mercury seems basically just known for doing Metroidvanias. They did a bunch of the Castlevania games, Lords of Shadow, I believe. I haven't played any of them.
Neither have
I. I've heard mixed things about them. They apparently were pretty controversial.
And they found their stride with Metroid, and that's what matters.
Yeah. So I don't think so, unless if Konami comes back to them and asks them to do another Castlevania, or they decide to do their own Metroidvania, I imagine they'd probably want to do Metroid 6, right?
Yeah, I sure hope so. And I hope that it ends up becoming like a next level games thing, where Nintendo is really happy with like the stuff that they're doing, that they just outright buy them, have them become an internal studio rather than a kind of third party or second party.
Well, we'll see. It took Next Level Games a long time.
Right, they had to make Luigi's Mansion Other Moon, and Luigi's Mansion 3 was released after or before they actually bought them. Next Level Games had been doing a ton of other things as well. So, I mean, it's Nintendo. They tend to surprise us, so they might just do it, or they might take a while. But anyway, I'm looking forward to the future. I guess a couple of other things we have here in our notes to just mention briefly. You had written down, why did Kraid fuse with Ravenbeak?
So that's the other thing I was kind of confused about. Did you notice? So when like Ravenbeak becomes like this dragon form or whatever, that's Kraid.
I honestly didn't notice. I was too hyped about
flashes and like just a handful of like frames. So it's not like a fan service thing. Like, otherwise they would have like made it more upfront. But no, his outer body is just straight up Kraid with like his head inside the mouth.
So was it because Kraid. The X parasite? Because you defeat Kraid before the X parasites are released. So did an X parasite find Kraid's body in the lava, absorb it, and realize I can't become this? Then it became more powerful, and then went to Ravenbeak at the end and was like, "Ooh, this guy looks yummy." Ate him and then fused them. I don't know.
I have no idea. Like it just seems like such a weird detail, but it feels like it has a reason for being there at the same time.
Yeah,
I It can't just be like fan service. Otherwise, they would have like given it more frames. Like you completely missed it.
for real. I don't know. I didn't even notice at all. So who knows? I'll pay attention next time and see if I come up with any theories. But don't count
Yeah,
on it.
I didn't even notice till like my third or fourth playthrough.
Like, wait a minute,
So,
that's
like,
great. That's awesome. The other thing we have on here are the Shine Spark puzzles. I haven't done enough of them to have a strong opinion about them, but they are hard, and I don't know if they are particularly rewarding for the items they lock behind them.
so I have a few. So with the rewards, when you're at 100% in the game, I kind of agree with it because one, you've already beaten the game,
True.
and two, just getting another like missile set isn't like that impressive when you're at 200 plus missiles.
Yeah.
But what I think a lot of people are missing is that the reward of these Shine Spark puzzles is not the missiles,
Yeah. No.
but actually that they're teaching you how to sequence break the game.
I knew you were
Because
going to bring that up. Like, I felt that's where
Because-
this was going.
half like a bunch of these Shine Spark puzzles are literally completing the puzzle sequence breaks the game if you do it as soon as you can come across them.
Yep.
So like there's an E-Tank in Daron that's a fairly challenging Shine Spark puzzle that you could do immediately after getting the speed booster. And if you do that puzzle as soon as you get the speed booster, not only is there the E-Tank there, but if you continue to the next room, to the elevator, and then go to the next room, the super missiles are there.
Oh.
And so you can get the super missiles like hours hours early.
That's really cool. Because I know that speedrunners have been able to completely break the game as well.
Yeah. One of the Shine Spark puzzles is straight up the way how you get gravity suit early too.
Oh yeah. I've seen the method for that actually, and yeah, you do one of the Shine Spark puzzles to get there. It's so cool, and they definitely planned on sequence breaking, because Kraid has a special way of defeating him if you have the bombs early. Like, there's a block that you can destroy on the platform at the bottom, where if you go inside of it and do another bomb, it sends you into a boost and it launches you into his stomach, and then as you just start dropping bombs, and then he dies and he's done because you're inside of him. It's so cool. Like, I wonder what other secret things they've added to maybe some boss fights where you use weapons that you're not supposed to, a lot like Kraid.
Well,
or maybe that
there's
was
a
just
bunch where-
indication that they knew that you were going to sequence break. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch that you can Shine Spark from outside the boss room and then get into the boss room and then just like jump straight into them.
Yeah, true.
So talking about like they knew how to sequence break Kraid, part of that sequence break, they intended you to get the grapple beam early. And in order to get the grapple beam early, you have to know a special technique of ledge jumping. And there's nowhere in the tutorials that talk about it. And when I first saw it, I thought it was a glitch. But then, like, you look at the rooms that they designed and the fact that they knew you would have this ability by the time you got to Kraid. No, it's just straight up like an ability that they planned for people to figure out.
It's literally like wall jumping in Super Metroid, where it's not, something that they specifically showed you until the middle of the game, but Samus has access to it from the beginning. And there's no animation when you cling to the wall like there is in Dread in Super Metroid, which is why it's more of like an advanced technique. So, yeah, anyway.
Well, so by ledge jumping, you can do a slide at a ledge, and then when you hit the ledge, you can immediately do a jump, and you'll get a bit more momentum in a direction.
That's cool.
Than a normal jump.
That's so cool.
And it's completely intentional by the developers.
It's so cool, because I've seen them like do these sequence breaks in like the lava area, where the only way to get into like some of the morph ball slots are by doing these types of ledge jumps and then a perfectly timed wall jump. But the way that it's designed, it's clear that that's how they intend you to do it if you're sequence breaking, So it's the same idea. All over the place, there are lots of things like that. And it's really cool. I think that it strikes the nice balance between modernized Metroidvanias where you do kind of have a linear path that they expect you to take, and like Super Metroid where they don't really tell you anything about the world. So the fact that you can sequence break and that you can do all of this stuff means that they really did try to keep in mind all of the veteran Metroid players that are used to the non-linearity stuff, and if you play the game multiple times, you'll find that non-linearity. But it also caters to newcomers to the series by making the next point that you're supposed to go to not too far away from the current room that you got your last thing in. So you might get lost a couple of times on your first playthrough, but the world design is set up to kind of guide you through if you remember the more recent abilities that you have. And I think that that's a very clever, very kind of forward-thinking way of doing it, because Dread is honestly like a revitalization of the series. And I'm here for that entirely. I think that this game is going to really put Metroid on the map. It's going to kindle some interest in other Metroidvania games. I'm sure people are going to look into like Hollow Knight or other Metroid games after they play this one, if this is their first ever Metroidvania. And I'm just really excited for the future of Metroidvanias, because I really do think that Metroidvania games are my favorite genre of all time. So
yeah,
those are kind of my
we both
thoughts.
put Metroid at the top of our list of favorite franchises.
Yep.
So.
Well, behind Zelda, the way we wrote it down. But
we definitely like our exploration-based games.
yes. And like my first thought when I kind of did some of the linearity stuff in Dread, I was just like, man, I kind of miss being lost like I was in Super Metroid. But then after a while, it didn't bug me anymore, because I was like, nah, this game was designed so well and the maps are great.
It's designed to kind of keep you on the intended path, I think mostly for newer players, to keep you in the action going. But you can break from that path with relative ease, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's mostly just like they would keep you on this intended path by just making the alternate paths seem really scary.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. Like, oh no, this room is really hot, and if you aren't careful, you'll die because it's really hot in here. Or whatever, stuff like that. But I mean, I do kind of wish that there was one thing, maybe a more central location that you traverse through multiple times. Like in Super Metroid, you kind of have that first area, like right where you land your ship. You go through that area and its surrounding rooms multiple times throughout your adventure, no matter the pathing that you end up taking. And like Prime 1 has, again, kind of that first area that you land in where you're going through that in branching paths multiple times. I do appreciate the Dread layout. I love the world design, but it doesn't have like a central place that I just, remember as kind of like my hub, where if I go to this place, I can get everywhere else really fast and easy, so... But it doesn't really bug me as much anymore. It's just kind of like hopefully Metroid 6 kind of draws a little bit more inspiration from the Prime team and some of that stuff. But either way.
And Super, yeah. I would love to get a new Metroid game that kind of embodies a bit more of Super.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
With Mercury Steam, I don't know if that's entirely their style, to be honest.
Yeah,
and this feels like it's breaking away more from linearity than Samus Returns did. So I'm just happy for what we've
True.
done.
That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know. I think I could continue talking about this game for a very long time, but we've kind of hit all of our points, and we've actually been talking about this way longer than I thought we would.
Yeah, we're about half an hour over what we intended to go.
Right. We, as kind of like a little bit of housekeeping here, well, first and foremost, we both agree that Dread should be a 10 out of 10. We've already said that. Go get it. If you haven't gotten it, give it a shot. Worth it. Incredible game. But now for some like housekeeping on what to expect from the future. Again, like we'll be jumping around all different sorts of topics in Nintendo. Next time we'll probably talk about Smash Brothers, and we're gonna try to keep our episodes to around 45 minutes from now on. Metroid Dread was just such an amazing experience that we apparently had to talk about it for an hour and 15 minutes. So hope you enjoyed all of that and whatnot. Anything else that you'd like to point out, Jordan, before we wrap up here?
Dread's good.
Dread's good. You said that already, and it is true. Anyway, thanks for listening to NintenFusion, a Nintendo podcast that fuses past, present, and future Nintendo thought. We will catch you on the next episode. Thanks.